Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Running Scared, a 1986 film. Ultimately, I could go into every single actor that's in this movie and every single accolade that they've ever done, and that would take forever, because it would. Ultimately, this movie really ties into actors Gregory Hines and Billy Crystal. Gregory Hines plays Ray, Billy Crystal plays Danny. And ultimately, I have to say 1986 for Running Scared because there's a ton of other Running Scared like films. There really is. There's one with Paul Walker, and there's one with seemingly tons of others. So, this film really centers on Danny's character. We have, in the very beginning of this film, we have Danny who has to go to a funeral for an aunt to ultimately realize that he is getting a ton of cash. Ultimately, it seems that we have a seemingly will they won't they kind of relationship going with Anna. Anna really throwing in Danny's face that she has a dentist waiting for her. He's got a real career going and so on and so forth. But it seems like Danny is like ultimately trying as much as possible not to care about Anna and all the stuff that she says, but because it's really just hurting him more so than anything. And he doesn't really quite understand why exactly Anna is trying to go out of her way to hurt Danny. I guess to just be like, well, like, I want you to take me back. I want you to, like, forcibly take me back. But, and the whole dentist thing was a lie to justify us maybe trying to get back together. Because I don't get why she's consistently telling Danny, "Oh, I got something set up. I got something wonderful set up over here, and you can't be there." And I don't get that. I don't get that at all. Cause, and also recently, Danny is asking Anna. It's like, well, hey, do you wanna kiss? Do you wanna go and play around in the bedroom? She's like, no, yes, yes, no. It's like, do you wanna make sure that do you want to revisit our relationship? She's like, yes, no, no, yeah. So, reasonably, I think this whole Dennis thing is made up. She wants to get back. She wants to get back with Danny, but reasonably, she has no real way of wanting to just mention that, like, hey, I want to get back with him. So going further into this film, it's also we have seemingly a big threat in the city. We have a character called Gonzalez that seems to be a big, huge threat in this town. He is the king of crime, seemingly, and he is the one who is seemingly dealing with coke. Seems to be any cop film normally with not much of a script. It's like, oh well, it has to be drugs, right? It can't just be anarchy and like it always either has to be drugs of some sort, or it has to be anarchy, or it has to be just they are having some political agenda of sorts for a villain. With when it comes to a cop film, like you have a dirty politician that is making his way, and there's some hero that's sniffing that out, and is like, "Oh, I know that you're gonna try some things in the political office, so I gotta get to you." It's always those kinds of films. But anyways, so with that, we have a ton of other actors that ultimately I won't take the time to go into. But we have a ton of other actors, and also we have, of course, playing Gonzalez. We have Jimmy Smits, who ultimately had been in NYPD Blue, I believe, most notably, but he has been in a cluster of other things Dexter, which have you. We also have two seemingly younger detectives taking the position of Ray and Danny from them, because Danny and Ray are ultimately otherwise deciding to realize how long they've been undercover, realize how long they've uh, been in the game, and they're starting to think about, like, you know what, like, since we've come into a big spot of money, how about we do something with this? How about we rethink our careers? How about we rethink what we're doing, and ultimately just decide to make this huge change in career? Ultimately, to where even Anna is like questioning, is like, "Are you sure you're gonna want to do this? Are you sure about all this? I don't think it's gonna happen. Like, I think that you just like what you're doing." And that's kind of interesting. You would have thought Anna would have sided with, yeah, like, you should go and do your new career, so that way I won't have to worry about you coming home, or not coming home one night. Ultimately, cementing that she wanted to get back with Danny. So, anyways, yeah, fun adventures. Ultimately, that I'm gonna get into. Spoiler time, of course, coming soon. Really, this is a fun film where ultimately there's a lot of jokes to be had, and we have a lot of characters that are weird, and because we have stereotypical, like, some heavy stereotypical cop stuff going on in this movie. And really, I remember, I think Billy Crystal had mentioned that he had done some cop movie, which I would assume would be this one, where when he was going through the first take of some scene, I guess they added in the shot sounds later. And so for Billy's first take, he would have a gun on him, and every time that he would shoot somebody, he would say the words bang, 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 to say that he shot somebody. And ultimately the director yelled cut, and was like, well, yeah, that take was really great and all, but ultimately, could you not say bang when you're shooting people? And he was like, oh, I didn't think about it, like, oh, it was just like, I was just in my head pretending to be cop, and ultimately that just came out, like pretending to be, like, when you were a kid and you were thinking, like, oh, I want to be a cop, and that just came out. So that was kind of like a fun anecdote, probably for Billy Crystal, and just to not even realize what he was doing. I think ultimately Billy Crystal had played a cop again. I think in the movie Small Apartments uh, with Johnny Knoxville, and uh, God, I can't think of anybody else in that movie. Um, I probably watched that, and it was kind of a goofy, weird movie. It's very odd, but I don't know. It was also, there was a little bit of jokes here and there somewhere. But anyways, moving on. Let's go into spoilers about this movie. Let's crack down and ultimately just kind of easily and quickly just kind of go into this film. It's fun. There's some fun things. So let's, at the end of the day, go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil this movie. So, spoiler time. Reasonably, in the very beginning of this film, we have it be that uh, that ultimately we have Ray and Danny going to seemingly find where the crime's at, find where the crime's hanging out. And so reasonably we have it to where Gonzalez and Snake uh, ultimately come driving in, and Gonzalez ends up going driving out because like, hey, cops are here. So Snake ends up running to his apartment building where Danny and both Ray are making their way to Snake. Told him to say, "Oh, hey, how's it going? What's the briefcase? What's the briefcase, Snake? What's with the briefcase?" They find out that the briefcase is filled with $50,000. And so ultimately, like, whoa, you got quite a bit of cash there, $50,000 in small bills. And so reasonably, they're like, well, hey, we have probable cause to book you. And because ultimately, Snake was ultimately asking them, it's like, well, hey, like, do you have a warrant to look in my case? And they're like, well, we'll get one, and then you'll just be ultimately just sitting on your butt in an uncompromised position. Because he was sitting on the briefcase just to like have him not look at it. So we have it to where they look at these $50,000, and so reasonably, it seemed like there was not much to really book Snake on, and so Billy Crystal just goes out to the guys who they were all playing basketball with, mentioning, "Hey, yeah, guys, just letting you know, this guy Snake here, he's got $50,000 in a briefcase. Hey, if you guys want to go and protect him." And make sure that he can walk around town safely with $50,000. Like, make sure you say hello to him, and make sure you can walk around with him with that $50,000. And then so Snake's like, oh my god, he's telling all the neighbors that I have $50,000. Like no, you gotta arrest me. And so ultimately we have it to where both Danny and Ray are in the apartment, back in the apartment, and so Snake tries to punch Danny and misses Danny and hits Ray, and so ultimately they arrest him for assaulting an officer. So they end up handcuffing him, and they almost take him to the office. But Danny mentions that he has to go to his aunt's funeral, which ultimately after that we find out that she had a will to give him seemingly $40,000, and and ultimately we have to where while Ray is hearing that information from some lawyer of sorts, we have Danny and Anna both talking about their quasi relationship, ultimately having Danny to say, hey, or having Anna to tell Danny to sign the papers, sign for divorce, because ultimately she's getting remarried to this dentist. And so, reasonably, we're here now, and I think Danny is consistently just tuning Anna out, because everything that she's saying is just trying to hurt him. But I think he smells bullshit. I think he smells it. I think he smells a big whiff of bullshit. Because reasonably, there's not enough information about this dentist every single time that Danny kind of brings this up. It doesn't really seem that Anna has much to say about it. So it's like, is she really, like, is she just making up stuff to just try to, uh, try to see if I want her back, see if I can make things work, and dot, 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 dot. But he moves on, ultimately to moving on to $40,000, to where now Snake is being seemingly booked and ultimately trying to put on Danny's Cub hat, which is like, hey, don't put on that hat. Ultimately, Ray evidently is a White Sox fan. Interesting enough. So we also hear that there seemingly was a person who dove off a building. The problem with that is he drowned before he flew off the building. So he died before he actually himself died, and that is seemingly impossible. But his clothes, I guess, weren't even wet. So, baffled and confused by that case. So we have within, and ultimately we also find out eventually that this person was an actual cop later on. So pushing forward, reasonably the whole entire thing is to try to get Gonzalez. Gonzalez is the big key, the big fish in a small pond, I guess, for the Chicago Police Department. Everybody wants Gonzalez. Everyone wants to get him. So reasonably, we have it to where Danny and Ray are ultimately, their plan is to have Snake be under a wire to get Gonzalez saying some stuff that they can incriminate him on. So that's the next step, ultimately, to push Snake into the snake pit. So we have, because Snake tries to get all of his stuff back, tries to make bail, and then realizes that not all of his $50,000 is there. So we just have forcibly to where now we have them push Snake into, well, you're not going to get your $50,000, but and Gonzalez is going to want to kill you because you don't have the money. So how about you do that wire tap for us, and we'll give you the rest of this money that mysteriously had gone horribly awry. It seems like there's a lot of times where there's some kind of underhanded things that these guys tend to do that don't seem all that correct, or all that, let's just say, shady. So we have where Snake okays and says, "Yay, I'll go ahead and do whatever you want, so that way I stay alive for however long." So we have Snake do the sale. He gives a guy a briefcase, and this guy gives him boxes of TVs. And so ultimately, we have Snake eventually going to Gonzalez and giving him these boxes of TVs. And Gonzalez, through the mic, because we can't hear much of what's going on, it seems that Gonzalez is really angry with Snake, and he's thinking that Snake is ultimately working with the police, or ultimately, like, Gonzalez can't trust Snake. And so that's when ultimately we have Ray and Danny bust in to ultimately think that they are going to try to protect Snake, but Snake is actually just showcasing the wire to Gonzalez, ultimately to have Gonzalez see both Ray and Danny, so that way they can kill them. We have two guys that are coming into the fray from seemingly behind Snake and Gonzalez. And so you get to see them come up a little bit more. And so Gonzalez is mentioning, hey, I'm going to kill both Ray and Danny and this and that. But he is also not exactly trusting much of, like, Gonzalez isn't even trusting Snake either. So Gonzalez ultimately calls for Snake to die. He gets shot, he gets killed. Then shortly thereafter, we have the two guys from behind Gonzalez ultimately mentioning that they're police, freeze, and everything like that. And here comes the shootout with the SMGs, ultimately to fire away at the cops. Ray and Danny are being caught in this fire and they're ducking, hopefully that they're not going to get shot. We have Gonzalez running like a crazy person to hide away from the cops. So now Danny and Ray are ultimately scrambling through the entire ship trying to find Gonzalez, and we have the other two detectives ultimately looking for just the guys who had shot Snake. So we have where ultimately Gonzalez is hiding out within the ship. Ray and Danny are looking everywhere, and then eventually they see a shoe popping out of some little cover of something, and they ultimately find Gonzalez. So reasonably, the younger detectives are just kind of like, well, hey, we got ours, where's yours? And so Ray and Danny ultimately say, like, hey, man, like, we got ours, like, look, like, and they got Gonzalez, and the other two detectives were just in shock that they found him. So we have it to where they ultimately book Gonzalez, and they're feeling all great, and they're like, yeah. So the big master plan now is ultimately going to the bar to where ultimately Ray lands his woman. That it seemed that these two people were just wanting to have fun because recently Ray had mentioned that he had already been a husband, and I think Marianne had mentioned that she had already been a wife, and so both these two people were just looking for fun. Ultimately, it seemed that Marianne was also hitting on Danny, but she kind of sealed the deal on Ray. So it seemed like they were having a good time within the flashing of police lights, or ultimately waking up the next day with Danny bringing them donuts and then flashing the police lights. Or ultimately later on in the movie they flash the, I don't know what it is with those police lights where they gotta flash them all the time when they're having some bedroom business. But anyways, so we push on to have eventually Ray and Danny just like, what are we gonna do with this money? What are we gonna do? They take a trip down to, I think it was Florida, and they otherwise just decide quickly to buy a bar. Buy a bar, ultimately have some have some fun time with two women because ultimately Danny was like, "Yeah, we gotta get girls together. Like we gotta find women together." Funny enough, we have in the movie where the guys are otherwise enjoying their trip, and they're both wearing these chest shirts, and or Danny is wearing a darker skinned shirt, and of course Ray is wearing a lighter skinned shirt, which ultimately is like counterbalancing uh, skin tones and whatever. As a joke, it was funny. Uh, but then eventually they eventually buy this bar and then come back to Florida to tell Captain Logan, their superior, that are like, hey, yeah, we're just giving our 30-day notice. We've bought a bar. We're gonna go and just buy a bar. And Captain Logan's like, there's no way you guys are gonna do that. Like, if anything, like that job doesn't require you to shoot people. Like, that's never gonna work. And so Ray and Danny are like, no, that's what we're gonna do. So funny enough, they once they come back and realize that they only have 30 days left, weirdly and bizarrely they start to get more cautious, and weirdly and bizarrely they start to, like, Danny is realizing how heavy his gun is, and then eventually realizing, hey, maybe I should grab a bulletproof vest. And then we ultimately have Ray who buys a bulletproof vest too, because ultimately Billy is losing control of his heavier gun, and he almost shoots Ray, and so Ray's ultimately like, dude, I'm gonna buy a bulletproof vest because Danny's gonna get me killed before I retire. Captain Logan, before they left, had also told them that Gonzalez had gotten free out of bail and free out of everything. So Gonzalez is back on the streets, and so like God, so we gotta arrest him one more time before our 30 days are up, kind of thing. They gotta a race against time. So we have consistently in this movie where there is a swapping of cars seemingly going on. It seems like a lot of times when they have a car just kind of just driving around, some kids spray painted, ultimately saying an undercover unmarked police car, and so ultimately they have to get a new car. Ultimately, they eventually get a taxi cab for a car, which I thought was really funny. Uh, and then we also get to, excuse me, we also have Danny and Ray who have to be teachers to the younger detectives. The younger detectives have to be shown what are the worst things to do because evidently they're going to be the best, and so they want to know from Danny and Ray what not to do. And Danny and Ray don't want to teach these younger detectives. They're like, hey man, like we don't even know what we do, and and we've been doing it forever. Um, Kind of thing. They don't want to teach anybody anything, and they just want to take their 30 days and just kind of just do whatever they want. But seems that these detectives are like, no, no, we want to show us things, show us stuff. So pushing them to where now Danny and Ray are getting a taxi that is now has bulletproof glass, which ultimately Danny's like, yeah, great, like definitely ask for that. So we have the younger detectives pulling their Trans Am, and Ray ultimately mentions that the taxi is missing something. And so when the younger detectives come in with their Trans Am, Ray ends up backing into their car and scraping the whole entire side of that car. And then Ray ultimately says, now it's a taxi. And then they drive off. They try to drive off to go to the airport, hoping that there is some illegal drugs coming in from Colombia. And we have seemingly where they because ultimately they get a tip from someone that is going to tell them that there is a flight coming in, and ultimately it's the greatest stuff ever, and blah 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 blah. So pushing us to go to the airport and the flight that they were supposed to find where these drugs are, yeah, no drugs. So reasonably they have to figure out another flight that is ultimately coming into Colombia on that day, and there is seemingly some nuns and some priests that ultimately look very suspicious, and so now Danny and Ray take those people in, and because ultimately the nuns and the priest is ultimately going to Gonzalez, and Danny and Ray intercept them, and so Gonzalez drives off, and we have where they are chasing after him, this really long chase that is ultimately going seemingly on a subway track of sorts, to where we were just repetitiously going through these subway tunnels, just our way through, and so eventually this leads to them not actually getting Gonzalez, and so of course they end up uh, turning in these priests, this priest and this nun instead, to where they find out that there is actually drugs in their stuff, and to where ultimately they have to call the captain in to reconfirm that there are drugs in their items. And so now there's a ton of warrants uh, seemingly out for Gonzalez, and so reasonably they have to try to go out and find him, ultimately to seemingly find a home that he used to settle in, where ultimately he has a wife that may or may not be an immigrant. And we have this small little kid that is with this mother that is consistently giving Ray the finger. Like he's just like, yeah, yeah. He's consistently just like, I'm giving you the finger, and I'm giving you the finger, and so we have the entire time where Ray is just looking at this kid. He's like, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. And so while this whole conversation is going on, I can't help but like be like distracted by this kid consistently giving Ray the finger. I guess like this conversation wasn't really all that important anyways, but this kid was so distracting giving him the finger. And so we have we have eventually the door closed and Ray's like, "Oh no, like I need to knock on this door again." He knocks on the door, the kid answers, and of course Ray gives him two middle fingers. They're like, "Yeah." Like, "I got you." Yeah. And so like Daddy's like a little childish, huh? And he's like, "Yeah, whatever." Like he deserved it. He had it coming. So it seems that we couldn't. It seems like we were getting some information, but there wasn't much to get out of this. But we find out that as they're making their way out, that Gonzalez was actually there. He was just on another floor, and ultimately he had no pants on, and so now like Gonzalez is demanding, because he has a hostage, that he's gonna throw this girl over the railing unless they give him their pants. And like, my pants? So we have Danny that is forcibly giving Gonzalez his pants, and of course he misses. And so Gonzalez is like, I'm not playing around. Give me your pants. It's like, dude, I just throw them to you. No, give me your pants. So Ray has to throw his pants at Gonzalez, and of course, he gets them to Gonzalez. And so reasonably Ray is like, you see how easy that was to throw him your pants? And Danny is like, you know that you have a better arm than I do, but you know that I was a better batter. And this and that, like, like so hilariousness consumes because these guys are now walking around Chicago without pants on. And so we have to where ultimately Gonzalez makes his way out of this building and sneaks away yet again. So we have to where in this movie we have seemingly where the guys are just going after their girls. We have Ray at some point in the early portion of this movie trying to talk to Marianne and finding out that it seems that she has some like relative or like quasi husband of hers that ultimately is just kind of a dick. And so Ray ends up having Danny call an anonymous tip to have this guy being booked for suspicion of being tied with Gonzalez. And so Marianne is scrambling outside while this guy's getting arrested, and so Ray and Danny are waiting for her and to ultimately have their intimate moment, Ray and Marianne. So Danny comes home to have Anna waiting for him. It seems like Anna is again trying to get these papers signed, and here are the funny moments. Uh, because if the funny moment wasn't the whole talking about the he got the question wrong on Jeopardy, oh no, and like ultimately saying all these goofy things to try to get this guy arrested. Oh, he didn't say the question right on Jeopardy. Oh no, no. So that hilarious moment, always hilarious. Pushing on to now, Danny is with Anna, and like Anna's not having him sign papers. Ultimately, she found some money that is actually for him, and is ultimately should be for Danny. And Danny is just telling her, just keep it. Just buy something fun. You're going to have to buy something fun because ultimately you're going to be married to a dentist. Like, come on. Like, buy yourself something nice. So, like, Anna is really, like, every little thing she is trying to get back at Danny for. And still, Danny is not buying it. Anna is ultimately telling Danny to grow up, and he's like, I don't want to grow up. And he's like, well, like, do you want to revisit our relationship? She's like, yes, no. Like, do you want to sleep together? She's like, yes, no. It's like, stop, you're confusing me. You're driving me crazy. It's like, what's wrong with crazy? It's like so Anna is just so flustered and just so like he's trying to ask her quick questions to ultimately see what her answer is, and eventually Anna just storms off, and she ends up storming off into the arms of two villainous characters. So Danny ends up getting a phone call to think it's Anna, but really it's not. It's Gonzalez. Told him, hey, I got your woman. Come and give me my coke, and I will give you your woman back. So we have Ray who pushes on after Danny has to ruin Ray's lovemaking sesh to tell him, hey, Gonzalez has got my woman. What do you want to do? So Ray has to forcibly get the drugs from evidence, and the evidence person has to call Captain Logan, which ultimately, when answering the phone, is actually Danny, who's sounding quasi ballparkingly like Captain Logan, and he's mentioning like, "You're gonna give all that coke to one guy? One guy?" I know. I will only have you. I will only have you. God, what is it? What does he say? I will only have you give this to him and his partner. And so Danny comes strolling in and says, "Hey, Captain Logan chewed my head off about something about evidence." So that's when the evidence guy was willing to give Ray and Danny the coke. So we find out that it's some Ray and Danny are driving with this police motorcycle, and Danny's giving the information of where they're supposed to be at and blah 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 blah. So reasonably, Gonzalez had said that he doesn't want to sniff a cop or know that any cop is there. So Danny has to come alone, and we have Ray who forcibly has to enter from an unconventional way because there is a lot of like supposedly like Canadian or there's a lot of like certain kind of police officers that are there. So we have it to where Ray tries to sneak into this area or sneak into this building, ultimately to realize every single police officer that was in this this establishment, this building, ultimately was replaced by Gonzalez's men. And so we have where Ray is ripping off the tape of all the actual police officers, and we find out that of course like all the men were replaced by Gonzalez's men, and so Gregory is like, oh crap, well I have to figure out a way of how to surprisingly get into this building. And so because all the men are Gonzalez's men, so he has to kind of like surprise his way into there. So the only way up there is through some like the guys who end up cleaning all the windows through all this big huge building. They had some uh, like rope and some like rope kind of contraption to where ultimately it looks it's weird. It's some rope contraption to where ultimately somebody can like climb up with these ropes to clean all this window up, to clean all these windows, which really makes this contraption makes no sense. Uh, Recently, this contraption looks really unsafe, but I guess it is what it is. So we just have Gregory Hines that is just like is just climbing up this building with these ropes, and I'm like, this looks awful. Like Gregory Hines is literally like climbing up here with ropes, and it's like, good God, like I wonder how like Gregory did all this because it's like God, just that contraption to clean windows looks seems awful. It's like, hey guys, you're just gonna have to learn how to climb with rope up this building, and then hopefully you can wipe this window. Hopefully that works out for you. So we have where Danny ultimately is going into an elevator, ultimately to realize that Anna is in the next elevator. And so we have where, of course, Danny is showcasing that he has the Coke. And so, really, Gonzalez is, of course, just going to try to otherwise kill everybody because that's normally what he does. And so, recently, he ends up trying to shoot out the elevator to try and kill them, and it doesn't work. And then, so really, eventually, uh, we have the two younger detectives that ultimately were working under Ray and Danny, who are also kind of sniffing out this whole crime, ultimately thinking that it's like, hey, there's something suspicious about what they're doing, because ultimately they're not exactly having the like when they went to the bar with them, they weren't really drinking anything, and ultimately they were kind of putting together some heavy artillery and stuff like that. So ultimately, they tried to follow him because ultimately there was something about what they were doing that was really suspicious, and so we eventually have Gregory, who is breaking into this building, sliding in, and then we also have the younger detectives making their way in as well. Ultimately, the younger detectives don't know about the police officers that are actually Gonzalez's men, and so Gregory has to break in to try to save, to think he can try to save Danny. But then also, when the younger detectives bust in as well, ultimately, Ray has to mention to the younger detectives, "Hey, these are all Gonzalez's men. Shoot everybody." To where Ray is shooting some of the detectives, or trying to, because it looks like the way he tries to shoot, like, does nothing, like shoots no one. This spray looks like it's up in the air rather than actually legitimately at someone, but it is what it is. That was probably a very difficult contraption to try to fire a gun in, much less do anything else. So everybody is firing at everybody. We have it to where Danny is yelling to Anna that he's like, "Hey, does is your door opening?" And she says no, and he's like, "Well, you now have to jump to me. Jump to my elevator because my elevator is open." So Anna has to forcibly get the courage to jump to Danny's elevator. Ultimately, he's telling her, like, "I'll catch you. Like, come to me. Like, I'll catch you." So we have to where Anna jumps to, of course, Danny's elevator, and of course, he does catch her. Like, basically, he's like her pillow for her to fall on. Basically, he's like, she falls right on him. So and because ultimately he's like, "I'll catch you," and she's like, "You better." So we have Ray, who is ultimately now eventually makes his way from out of this that weird uh, cleaning contraption thing to make his way down to make his way around the building to kill any of the rest of the of Gonzalez's men, as well as the other detectives are doing the same. And to where eventually we eventually have to where like everybody's getting annihilated, and eventually, since Danny is ticked off anyways, Danny is also throwing Gonzalez's coke off to the side of the elevator to make it crash onto the ground, to where ultimately Gonzalez won't be able to collect any of this or be able to use any of it, and he's screaming, "Oh, my coke, my coke!" while Danny is crushing all of it. It's like, "Here you go, here's all your coke, hey, bon voyage," because ultimately you were trying to kill me, motherfucker. So Gonzalez is irate because his coke is completely annihilated and this and that. So it gets to the point to where all the detectives kill all of Gonzalez's men, and Gonzalez is the only one that's left. We have it to where seemingly before Danny, Danny and Ray had been almost mugged, to where they were running after the guys that were being mugged, and ultimately they got in a car, but they couldn't quite get away. They had to circle around, and ultimately Ray and Danny had shot down that car, and Ray had said, "Yeah, every single one of my bullets landed onto this car." And so now we have to where Gonzalez is now for Danny and both Danny and Ray to shoot down. And so reasonably now Danny and Ray are trying to shoot Gonzalez down, and ultimately they do kill and shoot him, have him to roll down this escalator to where his body is just kind of laying there on the escalator. To where Ray's like, "Yeah, every single one of my shots all landed." To where it's like, again, Ray, really? You're just like, who cares who killed who, as long as they're dead. So And that kind of concludes this movie to where huzzah, huzzah, Gonzalez is dead. Uh, Tons and tons of happy endings for everyone. We have it to where Anna and Danny are kissing one another and kissing one another very much. Ray is ultimately asking, "Hey, what about that dentist?" And Anna's like, "Who?" Like, yeah, I thought so, kind of thing. Like, yeah, there was never a dentist. So Ray and Danny come to the consensus that, you know what, maybe this is a silly thing to buy a bar and retire off to Florida. Hey, like maybe we should keep on maybe we should keep on being police officers. Maybe like we have to really keep cleaning up this town, and ultimately they offer the bar to the younger guys. Hey, do you guys want to buy a bar? And also the guys are like, no. It's like, no. So that's how the movie just kind of ends with them just kind of like having a la-di-da ending of seemingly not retiring and maybe having a possible sequel after this. But yeah, so that's really how the movie just ends with a quasi happy like ending, which I'm sure their boss would probably rip them a new one for all the stuff that they did and this and that. But that's just the end of the movie. So I'm gonna get out of here. I thought this movie was really fun. It's funny. It's good. It has a happy ending, and that's all you can like about it. So I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.